Today's lesson is the pho phenomenon. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
Hello, I'm Kiki.
And welcome to our program. And today we're going to be talking about food. There are all sorts of different kinds of food to enjoy in the world. Kiki, have you tried Vietnamese food before?
Oh, yes. I love Vietnamese food. My favorite is the banh mi. The Vietnamese sandwich.
That's right. It's made with like French bread or something,
yes.
And it has all sorts of savory ingredients in it. Indeed, it is very tasty. But I must admit, I'm not very familiar with Vietnamese food, which is unfortunate because there are lots of Vietnamese people who live here in Taiwan, and many of them have opened Vietnamese restaurants. So maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I should try something called pho.
Well, you definitely should. And we are really lucky because living in Taiwan, we have the opportunity to taste a lot of different types of pho because pho, depending on which part of Vietnam it comes from, everybody does their broth differently and every store has its own specialties. So it's really nice that we get to try all these different flavors right here in Taiwan.
Absolutely. You don't have to go to Vietnam to try this food. You can try it right here in good old Taiwan. So let's find out what pho is all about. Let's talk about the pho phenomenon now. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson, and we'll be right back.
The pho phenomenon. Step into the world of pho, a Vietnamese dish that's as mysterious as it is delightful. Imagine a steaming bowl of savory broth, tangled rice noodles, and tender meat, usually beef. It sounds simple enough, right? So what makes pho so mysterious? Well, here's the twist. No one can say for sure how it came to be.
大家好，第一部分介绍名词 phenomenon， 它的意思是非凡的人、事物或是现象。例如 Crime is not a new phenomenon, but has existed for years. 犯罪不是新的现象，而是已经存在多年了。或者 A rainbow is a phenomenon that people see when there is moisture in the air and the sun shines through the clouds. 彩虹是人们在空气中有水分且阳光穿过云层时所看到的一种现象。再来看到形容词 savory， 表示咸味的或是辛辣的。例如 This cafe sells a variety of both sweet and savory foods. 这家咖啡馆出售各种甜味和咸味食品。或是 These rice dumplings have an incredibly savory flavor. 这些粽子非常咸香美味。接着看到名词 broth， 它的意思是用肉、鱼、蔬菜或是谷类作物等煮成清淡的肉汤或是汤。例如 If you're trying to fight a cold, it's a good idea to drink some nutritious broth. 如果你想要击败感冒，喝点营养的肉汤是个好主意。也可以说Preparing a nice broth is the most important part of soup making. 制作汤料理时，最重要的是要准备好的汤底。再来介绍形容词 tangled， 表示纠结在一起、纠缠的，也可以是复杂的意思。我们可以说 The yarn was a tangled mess after my cat was done playing with it. 当我的猫玩完后，它玩的纱线都会乱成一团。又或者说Every time I put my earphones in my bag, the cord is a tangled mess by the time I take them out again. 在我每次把耳机放进包包里，到我再次拿出来时，它的线已经乱七八糟了。
Okay, first of all, let's break down the title here. We're talking about the pho phenomenon. A phenomenon is something that happens, and it's usually kind of maybe supernatural in a certain way, and people can't really explain it. It's something that's very difficult to explain. Yeah, what's this pho phenomenon? Why are people going so nuts about this particular Vietnamese dish?
Right, and usually phenomenon kind of hits society like a storm. It's just become so popular so suddenly, just like boba around the world. Everyone's crazy about bubble tea nowadays. And so is pho. And because, like I said, pho, there's so many different types of flavor. Everybody does it differently. So a lot of people just love to explore. So let's get right into our first part of today's article. Step into the world of pho, a Vietnamese dish that's as mysterious as it is delightful. So here today we're pronouncing the word pho as pho, but some people will say it pho. Okay, so if they're not too familiar with the Vietnamese pronunciation, they'll say pho. Oh, let's go get a bowl of pho. But you would usually hear Vietnamese people say pho. Okay, and it is a type of dish from Vietnam. And right here in the first sentence, we're going to talk about lots of different things and really learn about what makes pho really special.
Right, and it's as mysterious as it is delightful. So we could say it's both mysterious and it is also delightful. Yes, indeed, it's mysterious because we don't really know its origin. Imagine a steaming bowl of savory broth, tangled rice noodles, and tender meat, usually beef. So this is what you might imagine pho to be. It's a steaming bowl of savory broth. Okay, so if something's steaming, of course, is hot and steam is rising out of the bowl. And if something's savory, well, it is a kind of flavor that is salty and spicy, and it's not really sweet. It's a special sort of flavor that we use to describe food. In addition to describing food as being bitter or salty or sour or sweet, we also have the word savory.
And savory is a flavor that you really want to take in. There are lots of different types of parts and levels to this flavor. Maybe at first you taste the saltiness, and then at the back there's some kind of umami flavor. So there's lots of parts to this flavor that you're experiencing. And here we're talking about a savory broth. And what a broth is basically a soup base. And usually it's not just salt, water, and MSG. A broth is a soup that has been cooked over a long period of time, usually with different types of ingredients. So, for example, you can have a vegetable broth, so that will be vegetable-based. You can have a beef broth, which is, let's say, you add beef bones and some different parts of the beef into it, and you cook it over many hours to create this rich flavor and this richness in this soup. So that is what a broth is. It's basically a soup that has been cooked over a long period of time with a lot of different types of ingredients. And in this case, the pho usually is emphasizing on having a very delicious savory broth.
Right. If you go to have hot pot or huo guo, you'll often have to choose your broth first, which is what you cook your ingredients in. You can choose from different kinds of broth. So far we're describing this as being savory, a savory broth, and we also have tangled rice noodles. Okay, so these are noodles made with rice as opposed to flour, but they're tangled, okay? They're not orderly. They're kind of mixed together. They're kind of squirming around each other. So we use the word tangled to describe things like string or hair when they're kind of messy. And of course, if you have tangled hair, it's going to take a long time to comb your hair straight.
So what's unique about the pho is that once you put the broth over the tangled rice noodles, the broth or the soup is able to seep through the tangled rice noodles and really cover the noodles so everything tastes very flavorful. And of course, the last part of this very delicious bowl of pho is the meat, the tender meat, and it is usually beef. Okay, so when meat is very tender, it means that it's very soft, and when you eat it, it's not very stringy. It doesn't really get stuck in your teeth.
Right, and of course, beef is the meat from a cow. Well, it sounds simple enough, right? Indeed, that does sound like a simple dish. So what makes pho so mysterious? Again, we're talking about the pho phenomenon, which implies that it is kind of mysterious. So why is it mysterious? Well, here's the twist. No one can say for sure how it came to be. So here we've got the word twist. Here's the twist. That means it's something that you did not expect. If you're talking about the plot in a movie, for example, you might tell somebody, well, I can't tell you what happened at the end of the movie because there's a twist, which is something that you don't expect. And this is the twist, or something that you don't expect. Nobody really knows where it came from. So here we've got the phrase come to be, which means to begin to exist.
So that's all for part 1 of our article. Let's go and listen to part 2.
While its exact origins might be a bit murky, we do have some clues. Traditionally, Vietnamese people used cows only for labor, and beef didn't hit Vietnamese tables until the French colonial period in the late 1800s. Some believe that pho might have been inspired around then by a French beef stew called pot au feu, with the name pho derived from the French word feu, which means fire. Another possibility is that migrant workers from Guangdong, China, brought dishes made from water buffalo to Vietnam, helping to popularize the eating of livestock.
第二部分看到形容词 murky， 它的意思是含糊不清的、难以理解的，也可以是昏暗的。例如 The facts surrounding the crime were murky, so the police decided to investigate further. 这起犯罪的相关事证不明确，所以警方决定进一步调查。又或者说 Clara thinks John might be involved in some murky business dealings. Clara 觉得 John 可能有参与某些含糊不清的商业交易。再来看到名词 stew 表示炖菜，我们可以说 The delicious smell of the stew filled the kitchen. 炖菜的美味香气弥漫在整个厨房里。接着介绍动词 popularize， 指的是普及、推广或是使受欢迎。举例来说 Charles Dickens popularized publishing novels in serial form. Charles Dickens 使系列小说的出版模式变得普及。又或者是The famous musician popularized the new style of music by holding dozens of free concerts. 该著名音乐家透过举办数十场免费音乐会来推广这种新的音乐风格。
Okay, let's talk about the second part of our lesson for today. Right now, it begins by saying, while its exact origins might be a bit murky, we do have some clues. So it is true that the origins of this dish are murky. We have some idea about maybe how it came to be. If something's murky, it's just not clear. Sometimes if you're in water, for example, and it's not clear, you can't see to the bottom of the lake, for example, you could describe the water as being murky. Oh, this is murky water. I can't see the bottom. I can't touch the bottom with my feet. I'm kind of scared. I don't know how to swim. But in this particular case, yeah, the origins are kind of unclear.
Okay, so traditionally, Vietnamese people used cows only for labor, and beef didn't hit Vietnamese tables until the French colonial period in the late 1800s. So in the old days of Vietnam, the Vietnamese people, they didn't eat their cows. They only used their cows to do work. So they only started to eat beef when the French started arriving in Vietnam, when they started to colonize Vietnam. And that's when beef hit Vietnamese tables. When we say something hit something, in this case, it doesn't really mean that we took a piece of beef and slapped the table. It means that it's when something started to appear somewhere. Okay, so that's when it started to appear on the tables in Vietnam. And that's during the French colonial period. And a colonial period basically means when a foreign country comes to another country to try to do things to change the local culture and to try to make them follow their country's rules.
Well, they basically control them. Like here in Taiwan, we have the Japanese colonial period, which lasted from 1895 to 1945. And of course, lots of European countries controlled different parts of the world. And the French controlled French Indochina, as it was called. They controlled Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, if I'm not mistaken, until those countries became independent. And yes, the French were there, and they probably introduced the idea of eating cows to the Vietnamese, and maybe they thought it was pretty good, and that's a theory here. And some people believe that pho might have been inspired around then by a French beef stew called pot of pho with the name pho derived from the French word feu, which means fire. This is a theory that some people have. They think that pho may have been inspired at that time in the 1800s by a French beef stew. Now, stew is a kind of thick soup, and it usually requires cooking for a long period of time. I remember growing up, of course, my mother made some really great beef stew, and of course, she spent a lot of time cooking that beef stew. I think at the time she used what was called a crock pot to make that stew. I don't think that particular utensil or appliance exists anymore, but in any case, stew is kind of like a slow-cooked thick soup.
Right, and that's exactly what pot au feu means. A pot over fire. So that's usually what happens when you stew something. And even before crock pots, back in the olden days, they would use these cast iron pots to literally stew all their ingredients and make it into a thick soup over fire over a period of time. So the theory is that the word pho for the Vietnamese dish comes from the word fire, or derived from the French word fire. And derived basically means to come from something.
Yeah, for example, the English word kowtow is derived from the Chinese term ketou, which basically means the same thing, to bow down to somebody and to submit to their authority. And so here the name pho probably comes from the French word feu, which happens to mean fire. Another possibility is that migrant workers from Guangdong, China brought dishes made from water buffalo to Vietnam, helping to popularize the eating of livestock. So that's another theory, another possibility. We've got migrant workers from Guangdong. If you're a migrant worker, you're a worker who goes to different places in order to work, and when the work is done, you go someplace else. That's a migrant worker. They came down to work in Vietnam for a while, and then they went somewhere else. Maybe they brought that dish to Vietnam with them.
Okay, so it's possible that they were the ones that also got the Vietnamese to start eating their livestock, to popularize eating livestock. Popularize basically just means to make something become more popular, to get more people to like something or to do something, or to get more people to know about something. And in this case, it was possible that the migrant workers from Guangdong got the Vietnamese to start eating their livestock. Livestock are the animals that people keep on farms. They domesticate them. And for example, chickens, lamb, sheep, pigs, cows, they are all livestock. They're basically animals that you keep to breed, and then you might sell them for money or sell them for food.
Right, and remember, livestock is a non-count noun, so do not add an S to this word. We've got different kinds of livestock: sheep, cows, pigs, etc. Okay, we're at the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's listen now to the third part, and we'll finish things up.
To cook pho is to create a symphony of flavors. When making it with beef, one boils bones and meat with spices for hours to make a flavorful broth. Next, noodles, vegetables, and thin slices of medium rare beef are added to cook fully in the hot soup. For chicken pho, the process is similar, but the meat is already fully cooked when added.
第三部分最后看到名词 symphony， 表示交响乐或是交响乐团。我们可以说 The musicians performed a symphony by Brahms. 音乐家们演奏了一首 Brahms 的交响曲。也可以说 Last night we listened to a beautiful symphony at the concert hall in town. 昨晚我们在镇上的音乐厅听了一首优美的交响乐。
Okay, so the important part of pho is how to cook it. How exactly do you make it? Well, to cook pho is to create a symphony of flavors. If you like classical music, of course, you might go and see a symphony orchestra, which means it's got all sorts of instruments playing at the same time. You got the violins, you got the cellos, the violas, the flutes, the oboes, the clarinets, the trumpets, etc. They're all playing together. So if you have a symphony of flavors, you have all sorts of flavors together at the same time. time.
Right. You're adding a lot of different types of ingredients, and together they make up one tasty symphony of flavors. When making it with beef, one boils bones and meat with spices for hours to make a flavorful broth. So when something is flavorful, it means it is packed full of flavor. It is packed full of tastiness. You can describe things to be flavorful when you say something tastes really good and you can really taste the natural flavors. For example, that fresh blueberry that we picked was very flavorful. It had a lot of fresh blueberry flavor in it.
Yep, so again, you boil those bones and you boil the meat together with spices for a long time, and you make that flavorful broth. Next, noodles, vegetables, and thin slices of medium rare beef are added to cook fully in the hot soup. So this is your next step after boiling the bones and the meat together for a long time. You add the vegetables and the noodles, and then you also add thin slices of medium rare beef to cook fully in the hot soup, and eventually you'll be able to eat it.
For chicken pho, the process is similar, but the meat is already fully cooked when added. Okay, and that takes us to the end of today's episode. Let's listen to our lovely Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分提到，传统上越南人只将牛用于劳动，牛肉是直到19世纪末法国殖民时期才出现在越南人的餐桌上。那有些人认为越南河粉可能是在当时因为一道名为火上锅的法国炖牛肉得到灵感的。好，文中是用到 hit Vietnamese tables 来表达出现在越南人的餐桌上。那么 hit 当动词在这里是指到达，出现在点点点。我们补充一下，口语中常常会用 hit 加地方来表达到达或出现在某个地方，像 hit the gym 上健身房， hit the road 表示上路出发， hit the shelves 表示出现在架上，那就表示上架，所以这个片语就可以表达产品上架、新品上市等等。句子里面用到 Pho might have been inspired around then by 点点点来表达说越南河粉可能是在当时因什么得到灵感。好，当我们用 may have 或者是 might have 加上过去分词 PP 可以表达对过去事件或行为的推测，表示有可能怎么样，也许怎么样。那么 may 表达的可能性比 might 来得高。举例来说， Ian was supposed to be here 20 minutes ago. He might have been delayed by traffic. Ian 原本应该20分钟前就要到这里，他可能因为交通而耽搁了。好，那如果我们要表达对现在或未来的推测时，就会用到 may 或 might 加上原形动词。例如 The tickets may sell out very quickly. 门票可能很快就销售一空。好，那这边顺便补充一下would have 或是 could have 或者是 should have 加上过去分词 PP 的用法。第一个介绍 would have 加 PP 可以用来表达过去某件事可能发生的结果或影响，那常常会跟与过去事实相反的假设句连用，它也可以单独使用。例如 Frank would have won the race if he hadn't tripped. 要是 Frank 没有绊倒，他本来会赢得比赛的。第二个介绍的是 could have 加 PP， 那这可以用来表达对过去情况的推测，表示当时原本可以或者是可能怎么样。像 the accident could have been avoided， 那场意外原本可以避免的。第三个介绍的是 should have 加 PP， 这可以用来表达本来应该怎么样而没有怎么样，早应该做某事却没有这样。举例来说 I should have gone to bed earlier last night. 我昨晚应该要早点上床睡觉的，但我昨晚却没有这么做。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Phenomenon. Thanks to her amazing voice and strong stage presence, the singer soon became a pop culture phenomenon. Broth. The smell of the chicken broth filled the kitchen as it cooked. Tangled. She tried to comb through her hair, but it was too tangled. Colonial. The colonial period left lasting impacts on the cultures and social structures of nations around the world. Stew. After shoveling snow all morning, Ken decided to have a hot bowl of stew for lunch. Derive. Mrs. Moreno derives a lot of happiness from helping others who are in need. Symphony. At rush hour, the busy city streets echoed with a symphony of sounds.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Kiki.
I am Roger.
See you next time.